From the Mode Broadcast Center, I'm Frank Stoltz, sitting in for Larry Mantle today on Air Talk. The LAPD will be administering oral cheek swabs that detect alcohol levels at DUI checkpoints tonight. But unlike breathalyzers, the new cheek swabs also detect drugs, including cocaine, marijuana, and ecstasy. Cocaine and marijuana are traceable for up to 24 hours, ecstasy and meth for 3 days, and alcohol for 12 hours. For a closer look at this new technology and new way of detecting folks who are driving under the influence, we begin with LAPD Commander Andrew Smith. Commander Smith, thanks for joining us on KPCC.
Good morning, Frank. How are you?
I'm good. So talk about this new technology. Is this sort of like the swabbing for DNA, or only you're swabbing for something different?
Well, it basically uses the saliva in a person's mouth to test very quickly and we think very reliably for 7 different types of drugs that could affect someone's driving. The bottom line is we're trying to save lives by keeping people who are impaired off the road and arresting those that choose to drive while they're impaired, and this basically does that.
What are the 7 drugs?
It tests for methamphetamine, for amphetamines and their different derivatives, cocaine, any kind of depressant like a narcotic analgesic, that would be heroin or something along those lines, benzodiazepines, which are commonly known as Xanax or medications in that family, and methadone. And
some of those, of course, can be prescribed.
They can be prescribed, but they can also be abused. And a lot of folks that don't read the label need to know that if you're starting to take, for instance, Xanax for the first time, it says not to use equipment or operate machinery until you recognize what your dose is.
So will you arrest somebody who tests positive for Xanax?
Well, I don't think it's quite that simple. No, is the bottom line. This is an easy short answer. But the real answer is our officers are looking for people that are impaired, whether it's at our DUI checkpoints or whether it's somebody we pulled over. If you're impaired and our officers notice that you are unable to do the simple things that most people can do, like get your wallet out of your driver's license out of your wallet, walk to the curb, and perform the field sobriety test, then they're going to start looking at whether it's alcohol that's an impairment or whether it's some other kind of narcotic.
And so if, say, I am taking Xanax for the first time or something like that's going to pop up, and I'm a little wobbly, indeed, I may end up arrested.
You're in trouble, yes, sir. And it's the part that you said that makes it trouble is that you're wobbly, meaning that you don't have the motor skills necessary to drive a vehicle, and our officers are trained to look for those things.
Even if it's prescribed, and I just happen to be on it for the first time or something like that.
Well, that's one possibility. As you know, the doctors will tell people not to operate any machinery until they get comfortable with the dose they're on. But Xanax, as you know, is highly abused, and many people take many times what their dose should be, and so those are the folks we're looking for.
So the mere positive test for Xanax or drugs like that isn't going to trigger the arrest?
Correct.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to look for your symptoms before we even administer the test. If you don't have symptoms of being impaired, we won't administer the test at all anyway. You'll be on your way.
And same, for instance, for marijuana, which for some folks it's used medically nowadays. They may have used it the day before. It's going to show up on this cheek swab. But if you're not showing any sign of impairment, then you're not going to get the test in the first place.
That's right. You won't get the test in the first place. Just so you know, on marijuana, it's a little trickier. The active THC is what causes people to, lose their fine motor skills and maybe not drive as well as they should, or maybe be distracted. It only tests for that, and that's only active in your system for a few hours, depending on the person, after you ingest marijuana. So if you smoked marijuana yesterday and get pulled over at a checkpoint today, there won't be enough active THC in your system to trigger the response on the cheek swab.
Mm-hmm. And will these only be used at DUI checkpoints, or are all officers going to have this in their car?
Well, they're pretty expensive. So we only have 5 of them right now in the city. Basically, we got them through a grant from the city attorney's office and the Office of Traffic Safety. There's one in each of our jails, and then we have a couple of them that we can move out into the field. So if you're taken down to one of our jails, you'll get a chance to use the swab. Now, remember, it's still voluntary. We want to get some case law under our belt so we can hopefully use these more in the future. And the reason why is because they're a lot less invasive than drawing blood from someone. It's a lot quicker, and quite frankly, it costs a lot less.
So yeah, that was going to be my next question. Why are you moving toward these? Was there an issue with breathalyzers and blood tests?
Yeah, the blood test is pretty intrusive. I think we'd all agree. We do have phlebotomists, which are the folks that draw blood at all of our DUI checkpoints. And people maybe not realize it, but when they agree to drive a car and they get a driver's license in the state of California, they agree to give a blood sample if they're impaired or if the officer believes they're impaired.
Let's bring in Stephanie Arrache, who's a criminal defense attorney who defends folks who've been accused of DUIs and other issues involving impairment with driving. Stephanie Arrache, thanks for joining us on KPCC.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So Commander Smith was reminding us we are able to refuse this test, but we're obligated to take other certain tests.
Well, that's not entirely accurate. The new cheek swab test is voluntary, and they do have to get your consent, but they don't have to get your blood once you've been arrested. You can refuse. Now, refusing does carry with it consequences. You would lose your license for 1 year on a standard first-time DUI, but you do have the right to refuse any kind of chemical testing.
And what do you think of these new cheek swabs?
I think that they are a gross invasion of people's personal privacy rights and that they should be not consented to.
Why?
Well, first, okay, like he said, they're trained phlebotomists to take the blood. Those people are trained in scientific research and methods. People who are doing the cheek swab, they're just cops. They don't have scientific training. Now, there are certain DRE-trained cops, but they're not the ones normally administering these tests. So they don't really know the science behind it. There are opportunities for false positives with these tests. For example, if you're taking a normal decongestant that has ephedrine in it, you could test falsely positive for amphetamines. And it's another thing these cops are not trained to really know, and the machine isn't going to pick up on. You don't have to consent to any of these pre-arrest tests, any of the field sobriety tests. So you don't have to do any of the normal, touch the nose, count backwards, any of those tests. You have the constitutional right to turn those down, not consent to them, and they cannot be used against you in a trial.
And get your license suspended.
The ones before arrest will not affect your license either way. It's after arrest, if you are required to do the blood or breath or sometimes urine, that's what will result in the refusal that could possibly lead to the losing of your license for a year.
Well, you're saying the police officers may not be trained to administer this. I mean, how hard can it be to swab a cheek for saliva?
Well, actually, they give the test to the person. They swab their own cheek, is my understanding of it, but they put it into the machine. So what they're not trained for is outside things. They're not trained necessarily to ask if the person is taking any type of other medication that might counteract the positives that they're getting. So they don't know that kind of scientific background.
Commander Smith, you want to respond to that?
If you want me to jump in, yeah. Just one point of correction. The swab is only administered by our drug recognition experts, our DREs. They're the ones who receive the 1 week of training in driving under the influence of alcohol, and then after they pass certain tests, they are able to go into the DRE program. They get 2 weeks of training and up to 6 months of field testing before they're a DRE. And right now, the DREs are the only ones who administer these tests.
It seems inevitably, Commander Smith, that there will be more arrests.
Well, this is the very last step. Right now, we're only doing this as a person after they've given blood. We ask them, do you want to voluntarily take a swab? It'll give us the results in 8 minutes, and we're trying to get some case law. And we'd like to use these more. Will it result in more arrests? Quite likely, if it can detect people that are driving under the influence and their driving is impaired. That's kind of what we're in the business of.
Even if it's sort of an accidental situation where they're on some sort of medication.
Well, that's something that they could bring up with the judge when they're in court. But our officers are looking at people who are driving poorly or who are exhibiting symptoms of being unable to drive, and those are the ones we're focusing on. I
love how you sort of slipped in. You're trying to gain some case law here. What did you mean by that?
Well, that's exactly right. Here's the deal. Right now, we've got about 50 cases where people have voluntarily at the end of the whole arrest process agreed to do the swab. In all of those cases, they've pled guilty to either the offense they're charged with or a lesser offense. And we're hoping that an attorney will step up and take one of these cases all the way through so we can have a court that says, yes, this is a good test. Yes, we find that it's a legitimate test and accurate, and we can use it and expand its use. Again, for a couple reasons. Less invasive, it's quicker, and it costs less.
Criminal defense attorney Stephanie Arrache?
Well, there's a couple issues that I have with it. The commander earlier said that he used the example of Xanax, and that you shouldn't drive until you know your limits and what you're on, what your dosage should be. Now, this machine isn't able to determine between therapeutic levels and what a person's impairment would be. There is actually no scientific studies showing a level of impairment for any drug. With alcohol, you have a widely established 0.08% or higher. At 0.08, you are under the influence, your driving is impaired. There are scientific studies proving that. With any type of drug impairment, there is no scientific study, and that's one of the other issues with this machine. So a person who has been on Xanax for 10 years is going to test differently, even though they have the same amount of the drug in their system. They're going to not necessarily be impaired by it. So this machine and the officers administering it aren't going to be able to distinguish between that type of information.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here, but let me ask you, Commander Smith, so there is no scientific number on stuff like Xanax and cocaine. It's merely a positive test plus observation by the police officer that you are impaired that could result in conviction.
Right, a positive test at a certain level, for instance, 5 nanograms of active THC trips the machine to show a positive thing. But mostly it's the objective symptoms that the officers observe in the individual.
Okay. Yeah, it's a very, very low, though, the amount, any trace amount of any of these. All right, we're going to take a quick break and continue this conversation in just a moment, bringing in Tony Stein, who's president and technical director of the Safety Research Associates. That's in just a moment.